Welcome, travelers, to Adventures in Security. In this video, we explore the Indicators of Compromise Pyramid of Pain. This tool helps us understand how to detect attackers and defend against malicious activities on our networks. You can download the video script, including the bibliography, from the link in the description. Let's begin with the big idea behind this lesson. Not every indicator of compromise gives defenders the same value. In security operations, we often collect many clues after an attack or during suspicious activity. But some clues are fragile. An attacker can swap an IP address, register a new domain, or recompile malware to create a new hash in very little time. Other clues are much harder to replace because they reflect how the attacker behaves, not just which artifact they happen to use today. David Bianco's Pyramid of Pain gives us a simple way to think about that difference. It reminds us that the best detections are not always the fastest to write, but they are often the hardest for the adversary to evade. That is why the model matters in both incident detection and threat hunting. We use it to decide where to spend our time, which alerts deserve escalation, and how to evolve from reactive blocking toward durable behavior-based detection. Before students can understand the pyramid, they need a clear definition of an indicator of compromise. NIST describes indicators of compromise as technical artifacts or observables that suggest an attack is imminent, currently underway, or may already have occurred. That definition is important because it tells us two things. First, an IOC is observable. We can potentially see it in logs, process trees, network flows, file systems, registry entries, DNS activity, or security alerts. Second, an IOC is only one part of the larger cyber threat information picture. NIST also explains that cyber threat information includes TTPs, suggested defensive actions, and findings from incident analysis. In other words, a single suspicious IP address is useful, but it becomes much more valuable when we understand what campaign it belongs to, what behavior it supports, and what response should follow. That shift from isolated artifact to contextualized intelligence is exactly what the Pyramid of Pain is trying to encourage. It pushes us to ask not only what did we see, but also, what does this reveal about attacker behavior? The Pyramid of Pain is not saying that low-level indicators are useless. That is a common misunderstanding. Instead, it shows the relationship between different indicator types and the amount of pain we cause an adversary when we detect or deny them. At the bottom of the pyramid are indicators that are easy for us to distribute and automate, but also easy for attackers to replace. At the top are indicators tied to behaviors and operating methods that are much harder to change without redesigning the campaign. Bianco's original advice is still practical. When we receive intelligence on an adversary, we should ask what part of that intelligence we can detect and where it sits on the pyramid. That simple question changes how we build a monitoring program. It helps us keep low-level detections for speed, enrichment, and containment, while also investing in higher-level analytics that remain useful even when attackers rotate infrastructure or repackage malware. A mature detection program usually uses the whole pyramid, but it places growing emphasis on the upper layers because that is where long-term defensive advantage comes from. These lower pyramid indicators are popular for good reasons. They are easy to understand, easy to automate, and easy to distribute through security tools. A malicious hash can be loaded into antivirus or EDR. A bad IP can be blocked at a firewall. A suspicious domain can be searched in DNS logs or denied at a secure web gateway. In an active incident, that speed matters. However, this is also where the limitation becomes obvious. Behavioral IOC research has shown that the indicators most organizations use are often the easiest to operationalize, not the most durable. Attackers can change a hash by recompiling a sample. They can change an IP by moving infrastructure. They can abandon a domain and register another one. So in practice, we still use these indicators, but we use them as pivot points. They help us scope an incident, enrich a case, and buy time. They should trigger the next question. What artifacts or behaviors sit behind this indicator, And can we detect those too? That is the move from reactive blocking to stronger detection engineering. As we move up the pyramid, we start seeing indicators that describe how an intrusion behaves in an environment. Network artifacts are traces in communications data that distinguish malicious activity from ordinary traffic. Bianco gives examples such as unusual URI patterns, command and control information embedded in protocols, and distinctive client strings. Host artifacts are traces left on endpoints, such as registry changes, dropped file locations, service names, or persistence mechanisms. These matter because they often outlive a single file hash or IP address. An adversary may move to a new server, but their malware family may still beacon in a recognizable way. They may rename the binary, but the persistence mechanism might still create the same scheduled task or registry run key. For defenders, this layer is powerful because it creates better pivot points. Incident responders can use artifacts to expand scope across systems, while threat hunters can search for the same behavior across the enterprise to uncover unseen compromises. This is often where detection becomes meaningfully more resilient, without becoming too abstract to operationalize. At the top of the pyramid are tools and TTPs, and this is where detection becomes strategically powerful. Tool-based detection focuses on software used by the adversary, such as credential dumpers, loaders, remote access tools, or phishing kit builders. That is stronger than relying on a single hash because it generalizes beyond one sample. But the most painful layer for the adversary is TTPs. Tactics, techniques, and procedures describe the attacker's operating methods. MITRE ATT&CK is useful here because it organizes adversary behavior into tactics and techniques based on real-world observations. Instead of asking only whether we saw one malicious file, we ask whether we observed behaviors like credential dumping, scheduled task persistence, PowerShell misuse, or suspicious command and control patterns. Behavioral IOC research argues that these TTP-oriented indicators are higher value than basic atomic indicators because they are much harder for advanced actors to replace cleanly. If we can reliably detect behavior, the adversary has to redesign tradecraft, not just swap out infrastructure. That is exactly the kind of pressure the pyramid wants defenders to create. In incident detection, the Pyramid of Pain works as a prioritization model. When alerts come in, we do not treat every signal as equally meaningful. A single hit on a known bad IP may deserve attention, but a combination of host artifacts, suspicious process behavior, and attack-mapped activity is usually more compelling. NIST's CSF 2.0 says that the detect function is about finding and analyzing possible attacks and compromises, while respond is about taking action on detected incidents. The pyramid helps connect those functions. Lower-level IOCs help us move fast. They enrich cases, support initial scoping, and can trigger containment. Higher-level indicators improve confidence, reduce over-reliance on one fragile artifact, and make it easier to explain why a case should be escalated. After an incident, the same model helps us improve. We ask which indicators were merely tactical, and which ones revealed durable behavior. The best post-incident outcome is not only closing the case, it is converting incident evidence into better detections that will still work when the attacker changes infrastructure next week. Threat hunting is where the upper half of the pyramid becomes especially important. NIST describes threat hunting as an active means of defense that searches for indicators of compromise and detects, tracks, and disrupts threats that evade existing controls. That makes threat hunting different from ordinary alert triage. In a hunt, we are not waiting for a signature to fire. We begin with a hypothesis, usually informed by threat intelligence, recent incidents, exposed technologies, or attack techniques relevant to our environment. Then we choose the telemetry we need, such as DNS logs, EDR process events, authentication records, PowerShell activity, registry changes, or proxy data. Recent research also describes threat hunting as a systematic, analyst-driven process, which is a good phrase for students to remember. The pyramid gives the hunter a prioritization rule. Do not stop at the easy indicators if you can push upward into artifacts and behavior. If the hunt succeeds, the real win is to convert that knowledge into a reusable analytic, dashboard, or playbook. In that sense, threat hunting is not separate from detection engineering. It is one of the best ways to improve it. In practice, we rarely use the pyramid of pain by itself. We combine it with other frameworks to create a repeatable defensive workflow. Attack gives us a common vocabulary to describe adversary behavior. The pyramid tells us which of those detections are likely to impose more cost on the attacker. The Center for Threat-Informed Defense's Summiting the Pyramid project builds on this idea by giving defenders a methodology for scoring analytics against the pyramid and improving robustness while reducing false positives. That is helpful because it moves the discussion beyond intuition. Instead of simply saying a rule feels strong, we can examine what it depends on and whether an adversary can evade it cheaply. NIST then provides the organizational context. CSF 2.0 explains how detect, respond, and recover fit into broader risk management. And NIST incident response guidance emphasizes continuous improvement. Together, these resources give us a defensible way to explain why some detections should be preserved for tactical blocking, while others should be engineered for long-term resilience. That's it for this video. If you learned anything, please remember to give us a thumbs up and subscribe. And until next time, be careful what you click.